Hi, James Gurney here. I'm in East Durham, New York, and what I want to do is to paint these two white buildings if the sun will come out again. The first step is to check the measurements. I find a unit of one building and check it against the length of another building and the height from the top of that hedge to the top of the gable. That gives me some basic measurements. To start my pencil drawing, I'm using a water-soluble colored pencil over a yellow primed piece of watercolor paper in a sketchbook. The buildings are lined up parallel to each other along the highway, which means that all those sloping angles vanish to the same point. With the light disappearing behind clouds, I'm eager to get started painting, so I put out my water cup and my rag, and I get out my Casein paints. These are opaque water-based paints, a lot like gouache, white, red, and blue. I'm also going to put out some black, but I won't use much. And for the brushes, I'm using a couple of flats and a round. With this extremely limited palette, I only have the warm of the red and the cool of the blue. And together they mix a deep, dull violet. That'll be my dark, and I'll use that instead of green to paint in the large mass of trees that frame in the light buildings. Now the white of the buildings is not a pure white, but actually various shades of a light gray, and I make the gray by mixing white with a little bit of the blue and the red. My job then is to cover up the yellow. That yellow was painted before I left on the trip using acrylic gouache, but you could use Casein. The reason for that intense yellow is twofold. One is to force me to use opaques all through the picture to cover up all that yellow, but a little bit of it will show, and it'll be an interesting and vibrant contrast to the violets, blues, and reds in this limited palette. One of the keys to working with opaque paints is to not be afraid to paint across your drawing and cover up large areas of preliminary drawing that you did, because what's important to get first are the big shapes. The small details can come later, and things like the pillars on the porch can be painted over a large area of shadow. I'm seeing this window as a fairly simple shadow shape, almost an extension of the shadows that are cast underneath the porch. This ornamental scrollwork is pretty typical of buildings around here in New York State, and it's a lot of detail to capture, but I want to get the essence of it, the light and shadow, and especially the warm colors of the down-facing planes of the shadow that catch the reflected light bouncing up, and the cooler, bluer planes that are catching more skylight. In a fast painting like this, under changing light, some of the time is spent elaborating detail, but I spend other time with a big brush downplaying areas. Here I'm casting a shadow into the scene in the foreground to downplay those foreground areas. So my goal with this one is to really reduce all of the color to scarlet red and to ultramarine blue and white, hardly even really using the black at all. And what I'm trying to do is just use the reds for the warms, the blues for the cool, and to try to push everything to black and white or light and dark areas and try to eliminate the middle tones. And that way I can get an image that reads fairly simply, even though the colors are somewhat arbitrary.